Good morning, Dawg Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. We are jam-packed, much better mood today, turning the page today, a lot of things to look forward to, and we're going to just sort of settle in and do all of that with you. Here's how it's going to play out. Connor Riley has written a very interesting story at DawgNation.com. Sharp contrast, I believe, for Georgia and its opponent from this past Saturday, and this is more about what this means for Georgia looking forward. We're going to talk to Connor about that today. I think that's going to be really important. Now, we're also going to do that later in the show than we typically would because the former Georgia quarterback, Jake Fromm, who joins us each week, has asked, hey, can I come on live today? So Jake's got a lot he wants to say about Saturday's game and where it's going to go for Georgia after this. So we'll take Jake Fromm live today, coming up in about 20 minutes, have plenty from him on, kind of the situation around the Georgia offense, specifically what it needs to do to get better. We'll also kick off the show with some of that there as well, looking at David Pollack now weighing in on some of the criticism that he's seeing. How much does he agree with that? How much is he not agreeing with? We'll give you all of that. Also, in addition to that, I've got a small prediction to make today. It's probably not all that important, but I do want you to at least pay attention to it. So we'll do all that. We're going to have a good time, jam-packed here, trying to turn the page and get ready for what comes next. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by ServPro. Cleaning, restoration, construction.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Look, I know how it is after Georgia loses a game because I feel the same way that so many of you do. It's one of those deals where you're just not really sure if you want to, and at least for a little while. And listen, trust me, I get all that. It's like just jumping right back into it is one of those things that it just takes a little bit of time, right? And everybody's kind of got their own process on that. As I said before, my feelings, my emotions, and all this are almost certainly so similar to so many of yours. There's just a little bit of a, kind of not the world's greatest feeling coming into a week like this after what happened on Saturday against Alabama. I totally appreciate all of that. So if you're not quite so sure you're fully in on this week yet, and to be self-serving here for a moment, if you're not quite totally sure you're in on our show for this week yet, because there's only so much of the what went wrong against Alabama that you can take, I get that too. Let me give you one thing, though. And this is sort of like, well, if you're kind of not quite so sure what the week is going to hold, let me give you one sentence here that if I could sum up our next few days on the show, let me give you one sentence to sort of sum all of this up. And then over the course of our time together, we'll sort of talk about, kind of why this is true. Here's the one sentence. Obviously, the past Saturday against Alabama was not a great day for Georgia, far from it. But in bouncing back from that, I believe for a number of reasons, Auburn is a very good opponent for Georgia to play this Saturday in terms of starting the process of moving on, of getting better, of improving, and sort of getting ready for what comes next. So we are going to be very forward thinking on the show the next few days. Even if some of the issues from Alabama linger, how could they not? The fact of the matter is we're going to look at all of that through the lens of where do we go from here? Now, what's cool is coming up in a couple of minutes, and this is like 15 minutes from right now, Jake Fromm is going to join us live on the show today. And so Jake will help us do that. We're going to have a really good conversation with Connor Riley, who's written a wonderful story at DawgNation.com about kind of what we're seeing from Georgia and some of its freshmen and how some of those guys are being used right now. I think that's a really important topic. So all of this is kind of around the idea of bad game, tough situation. Now it's time to turn the page, correct some problems, and a really good rivalry opponent on Saturday for all of that to take place with. So that's kind of where we're going to be as we move through the next couple of days. But obviously, as I said, some of this also with some of the lingering stuff as it relates to a Georgia loss against Alabama. And one of the things that we hear, and admittedly, I thought some of this was pretty weird on Saturday night, the degree to which some Georgia fans wanted to fixate on the offensive coordinator, Mike Bobo. To my eyes, and I'm not a play-calling expert, to my eyes, it seemed like, they were pretty good play calls. I like the fact that Georgia was trying to be aggressive to begin the game, although it did not work. You certainly appreciated the fact that Georgia finally found some offense in the second half to give themselves a chance to win. I didn't quite get some of the Bobo criticism that came after Saturday night's game, but admittedly, I don't always get that as a kind of prevailing topic week to week, and yet it seems like it never goes away. So because so many of you do want to talk about that, I want to make sure I at least give some attention when this sort of comes up in the media at large. And I noticed our good friend David Pollack, the great former Dawg, on his own platform was talking about the Georgia and Alabama game. And in kind of referencing some stuff about the Georgia offense, Carson Beck, who we talked about plenty yesterday, and we'll talk about more here today. David Pollack also had sort of a thought towards, as he calls them, the Bobo Haters. Let me let you hear David Pollack. It'll set us up to talk about the Georgia offense here today. This is Pollack's thoughts overall about the offense and the role that the offensive coordinator, Mike Bobo, played in what happened on Saturday. Here's David Pollack.
Here's what I take away from Georgia and from Carson Beck. If Carson Beck is willing to let the ball ride like that and take deep shots that are there consistently and let Arian Smith make some plays, he's going to miss some. By the way, the first drive, Arian Smith missed that. He missed that play that, he could have changed the game. Like, that was a big deal. The running game was non-existent. Listen, all the Bobo retractors, all the Bobo haters, they came out pass. Like, throwing the football, trying to be aggressive. Beck had his worst day, rebounded great the second half, chucked the pill. By the way, the fumble was enormous in the second half by him when he was trying to scramble. But I liked he was willing to run the football. He was willing to make plays.
So listen, what David is saying there is that for those who've criticized Mike Bobo, part of the criticism for the first couple of games was not aggressive enough to begin the game. I even mentioned that myself. The Clemson game, it seemed like that, Georgia waited almost till the midpoint of the second quarter to start kind of attacking with some vertical passing game stuff. Obviously, that worked more, in the second half, but it seemed like they waited a long time to get aggressive. David says right there, well, against Alabama, they began the game trying to be aggressive. And from my standpoint, you have to judge the intent, and the intent was to try to call some plays that gave Georgia a chance to get off to a faster start. That, to my eyes, is what they looked like they were trying to do, and as you know, it just didn't work. So what I take David to mean right there is that you can't really blame the offensive game plan from Mike Bobo because it certainly had a chance to work, and if Arian Smith doesn't have the big drop and if there's not the pass interference penalty and whatever else, then who knows to how much of a faster start Georgia could have gotten off to, and then who knows how the game could have been changed because of that faster start. And I also sort of agree with the point that David Pollack is making, which is if somehow you can take the kind of free and easy version of Carson Beck that we got in the second half of that game on Saturday and find a way to expand that for a full game, then that does give you a chance to have a much more explosive version of the Georgia offense overall. I think that's a really interesting point from David Pollack. And with that in mind, Carson Beck himself was also talking about some of this on Saturday night. The slow start, what it could have been in terms of momentum, and the belief from Carson that what they did show in the second half does have a chance to be a little bit more of the consistent playing personality for this group going forward. This is kind of a follow-up to what David said there, Carson Beck's own words on the topic from Saturday night.
I thought, there's a few plays that go our way, and it's a totally, different start. There's a few flags, a few big plays where it's like, dang, but you can't sit there and, hang your head. When that does happen, we got to learn how to respond and execute, and that is what it is.
Do you think it's a momentum thing, the way the first kind of drive started and things sort of snowballed? Do you think if you guys maybe would have scored, it would have been a different ball game?
Yeah, I think momentum is a huge factor, especially in college football. I mean, we're on the road. They're at home, so, they start get going, and their fans are riled up, and it is what it is, and that's not easy. It's not particularly easy to continue to go and try to dig yourself out of that hole. But we were able to do that, and I'm proud of us for that. But there was just too many mistakes, and that starts with me.
So listen, I think everybody understands this, but I'm gonna say it out loud anyway. When Carson's talking about, hey, lost some momentum, could have had some momentum, could have changed everything. None of that is to make the loss to Alabama easier to swallow. I think we all understand that. What we're talking about right now is, okay, now with the idea towards moving forward, getting better, are there things that you saw from that game on Saturday that do give you some belief that this offense can be more successful moving forward, even against, top flight opponents like what we believe Alabama to probably be right now? I think the answer to that question is yes. I mean, I told you yesterday that I don't think that Georgia is likely to dominate opponents moving forward the way that it did for most of 2021 and most of 2022. But that doesn't mean that Georgia still can't be an excellent football team and perhaps even the best team. But the expectation for just like road grading dominance is probably that we saw in that era. That may be one thing that's sort of specially contained to that era and not quite the hallmark of this team going forward, because the sport seems to just be a little bit more balanced and there seems to be a little bit more parity. But one way or another, I do genuinely think that Georgia is still going to be a good offensive team before this year is done. Maybe not as great as many of us hoped that it could be, but still a very good offensive team because, my gosh, it seems like the sum total of all the pieces here, how could you not be better at some point than you've been for most, or at least parts of, the first 4 games of this season? But obviously the question then becomes, well, how do you get there? What do you do to make that happen? And, that's one of the things that Kirby Smart was talking about in his kind of weekly press conference yesterday. The general theme of, okay, how do you take the feeling of going out there and just letting it ride in the second half, playing loose, or as one reporter said, maybe playing desperate? How do you take that feeling and conjure some of that up in the first half so you can have 4 quarters of potential for success and not just a frantic comeback that was ultimately too little too late? This is what Kirby Smart said about that idea yesterday afternoon.
I think they need to play aggressive and play loose, but I don't want to ever be playing in desperation. But there was good execution. There was some good execution on third down. There was some poor execution on third down. Some of third down was knowing you have fourth down, which is not really the case in every game. That was a very different game to evaluate from a standpoint of the second half, because everything was very different than maybe a start of a game. It's hard to even evaluate because of that, because you had to throw the ball, you had to catch up. But certainly proud of the resiliency they showed to do it. But just as proud of some of that, I'm disappointed at the start of it, But like I said, we got to go get ready for Auburn, who's a really, really good football team.
Yeah, so I think that's all really fair, and I think it's pretty honest and candid from Kirby Smart right there. And at the end, he also does what we're trying to do today, which is pivot all of this towards Auburn for Saturday. And I get the pushback you're going to receive on that from some Georgia fans. The statement here is going to be, man, I don't care about Auburn. Auburn's not good. I want to beat teams like Alabama. And, of course, as a Georgia fan, I feel the same way. Every Georgia fan who's listening right now feels the same way about all of that. That it's obvious a game like the one that Georgia played Saturday matters more than the one they're going to play this Saturday. But as I told you, you can't go back and play Alabama again right now. You've got to earn the right to even see them on the field at some point in time in the 2024 season. That's going to take some real work to get that done. But the process of beginning that work, including this Saturday, I think Auburn is a very good opponent for Georgia to play because of all of that. Because keep this in mind. While Auburn right now is not a very good team, they lost again on Saturday to Oklahoma. They really seem to be kind of falling apart. They also weren't very good a year ago either. And Georgia still did not play a very good game against Auburn. We'll talk throughout the week about some of the defensive issues they had last year, trying to stop quarterback run and things like that. But even on the offensive side, this was also a situation last year where Georgia got off to a slow start and had to be saved essentially by Brock Bowers, who almost put on a Superman cape in the second half of that game and just kept getting the football over and over and over again when Georgia absolutely had to go out and get the win. He was the one that kind of had the huge star turn and allowed all of that to take place. Obviously, as you know, Brock Bowers is not here for Saturday's game anymore. This is a Georgia team still in the process of reinventing itself now in his absence. And so while Auburn on paper does not appear to be very good, it's a pretty good measuring stick for Georgia because we can judge how Georgia plays this year against Auburn compared to how it played a season ago. And if Georgia finally, for the first time this season, can put 4 quarters of offense together, doing some of what Kirby Smart described of being aggressive to begin games to sort of match the desperate, now or never way in which they played in the second half against Alabama, if they can do at least an aggressive version of that in the first half, then all of a sudden maybe Carson Beck and his idea of momentum that he says they almost could have gotten the Alabama game, maybe Georgia can conjure some of that up on Saturday. And it's momentum that doesn't just take them through 4 quarters against Auburn, who I'm not going to oversell here, really shouldn't have any chance of beating Georgia. But it's more about starting some momentum that can move on through the rest of the season. After all, Georgia's got a lot of big games remaining. And there is a very good chance that by the time we get to the moments that are going to really matter in the months to come, maybe by that point in time, this past Saturday in Tuscaloosa really is a different story, and it's a distant memory. And really, this is a Georgia team in the process of reinventing itself. That's what this new system gives us. It's an expanded playoff. It's a tougher schedule. There's just a little bit more room for error. Georgia gave up some of that margin on Saturday, but gaining ground, getting better, showing improvement, that's what the next few weeks are about. It certainly sounds like Georgia's pretty intent on making sure they get that done. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. It's presented today by ServPro, and we are happy to have you with us no matter how you get to us. Video 10 a.m., radio Athens, Sports Radio 960 The Ref, podcast wherever you find them. Just thrilled that you're here. Thankful to our friends at ServPro who make it all possible there as well. Messy situation for Georgia on Saturday. Perhaps you have your own mess that needs cleaning up. I'm talking about fire damage, water intrusion, things like that. Obviously, we're seeing horrible stories in the news right now as it relates to some of that kind of stuff, and some of that's very, very extreme. Also, in your situation, you may have kind of dealt with your own version of that too. And I'm not being flippant or casual about this. I'm being quite sincere that when these types of things happen, the restoration specialists of ServPro, this is the kind of work they do. This is what they're famous for. And sometimes these are stories that are big and make their way to the news, or in some situations, these kinds of situations don't get enough attention. But either way, ServPro is out there doing really, important work and intense work, getting folks kind of put back together and cleaned back up like it never even happened. That is what ServPro is all about, restoring the original quality of your home, of your business, your rental property, if you've had some sort of issue happen there. Taking care of real estate and getting it put back together like it never even happened. That is what our friends at ServPro are all about. Also, each franchise independently owned and operated. So please find them online. It's servpro.com. S-E-R-V. servpro.com. We're so happy to have them as a part of DawgNation Daily. They're a big part of our DawgNation game day coverage. Good friends of ours and an important asset for you. If you've had a home that's been damaged by fire, if you've had, water cause, flooding or damage, things like that, our friends at ServPro want to work with you. They want to get you put back together and get your home back to its original condition, put back together like it never even happened. Find out more online. It is servpro.com for more on that today. All right, we're going to get Jake Fromm here coming up in a couple of moments. Great to have Jake live on the show today, especially during a time in which there are so many questions about what is next for Georgia. And, of course, on a Tuesday, Connor Riley, we're going to get him coming up in a few minutes, too. Prior to that, I want to go around the doghouse here for a moment. And I want to invite you to read a story at DawgNation.com. I thought Earnest Greene had some interesting things to say yesterday as he met with reporters. And, one of the things he was asked about was, hey, what's the key takeaway from you? What lesson do you learn from the game against Alabama? And, sometimes Earnest can be like a lot of players, a man of few words, more about actions than words. So Earnest Greene sort of summed this up in 2 words. He said, what's the lesson I take? That's the question. His answer was just win the game, win the game. Basically, still feeling the pain of having not won that game. Earnest Greene says, what I learned on Saturday is that losing's not any fun. I don't want to do that any more than I have to. And I take that pretty seriously, because what you see from Georgia is still a resolve of character and a real strength internally that I think does give them a chance to move past all of this. And to kind of get a little bit more, serious about this just for a moment, this is a day and age in which, sometimes you kind of wonder where players go mentally after a loss. Is there going to be a checkout? We saw the kid from UNLV the other day just sort of tap out on the rest of the season because of, whatever else. And, we're in a day and age which we may see more of that from some teams in the future. But you obviously don't believe that you're going to see anything like that from Georgia. In other words, Georgia may lose a game, but moments like this don't run the risk of Kirby Smart losing the team. that their focus, their connection remains strong, their desire to have better moments than the one they had on Saturday. Of course, that's what they're all about. I think you got to take that. I think you got to take that pretty seriously here. That this is a Georgia team that may have lost the game, but there is no risk here of losing the team. I don't think anyway. There's no risk here of somehow allowing what happened against Alabama to beat them moving forward. The Georgia's just as eager to turn the page and get ready for what's next on this as almost anybody else is. And the good thing on Saturday night, we get a chance to see, or Saturday afternoon, we get a chance to see that with our own eyes as they get ready to renew the Deep South's oldest rivalry against Auburn. So check that out at DawgNation.com if you want to see a little bit more on that. Okay, so we got a fun show today. It's Connor Riley later on. Also, one of the big games that looms for Georgia, new information about how things are kind of coming together for the Dogs' opponent there in that game. Perhaps you missed this on Saturday. We'll give that to you there as well. So a lot to do over the course of the time together here today. But for now, what does need to happen for the Georgia offense to play better for 4 quarters than what we've seen thus far this season, and far better than what it showed at times there on Saturday? Somebody who knows this topic very well is the former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm. Let's speak to him now as a part of DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. And it's a Kroger Fresh Take here on our program as we welcome in Jake Fromm to the show here today. Jake, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being with us. Obviously, we've had more enjoyable conversations. A lot of Georgia fans still in a not great mood after Saturday, but we're certainly thankful to have you, especially after a little bit of a late night for you last night, that you'd hop on and do this with us here today. So thank you for your time, and we're glad to have you with us.
Yeah, always glad to be here, Brandon. Thank you for having me.
So I guess let me begin with this, and I want to ask this broadly on purpose. What did you make of what you saw offensively from Georgia on Saturday?
Yeah, I mean, I liked the initial start. I loved coming out, being aggressive, throwing the ball. And I think the start of the game just it could be so different if maybe we catch the go ball there on the first drive, or maybe we get the cover 0 check in the first quarter. There's just a lot of things that could have gone our way that just did not. It's kind of a tale of 2 halves. A lot of turnovers in the first half, and the second half, I mean, really kind of getting going, throwing the ball around really well. But on offense, what you want to be able to do is dictate the terms of the game. You want to be able to control the game with whatever you want to do offensively, whatever the plan is. And they wanted to come out and be aggressive and come out swinging. I just don't know if the plan was to throw the ball 40, 50 times like they did. And they just, because they got down so much so early, they just were constantly having to claw their way back, and they got put into a different mode offensively than they wanted to be. Once you get down 14, 21, 28-0 in a football game, hey man, the plan is out the window. What's our 2-minute passes? What do we like? And you kind of go from there. So I think they did a very, very good job of just, hey, slowing everything down. Let's get the first one. Let's keep moving, keep chopping, and be able to really get themselves back into this football game.
Yeah, I don't pretend to be a game planning expert. I defer to those who are. But as someone who just tries to watch the game and obviously a fan of the game, the one thing I wanted to see from Georgia was to attempt to be more aggressive to begin the game. And it certainly seemed like that's what they were trying to do.
100%.
Well, obviously, there's some risk associated with that. It's one of the reasons why sometimes teams don't do that is because if you go for the home run, you don't get it. Oftentimes, you strike out. Georgia struck out, and then all of a sudden, now they face a deficit. And to my eyes, well, now the running game is non-existent. You know, Trevor Etienne and guys like that might as well not have gotten on the bus because you can't really run the ball when you're down by 1,000,000 points. Is that kind of, I guess, what you saw? And it sounds like you were also okay with knowing that Georgia had been criticized for kind of being maybe too conservative to begin the game against Clemson. The fact that they were so much more aggressive to start this game as a quarterback yourself, were you happy with that decision?
Yeah, I was. I wanted to see the game being put in Carson's hands more. I want to see a more aggressive thought process, attack, play calling, and to me, the game plan that I'm seeing, hey, we really like the matchup, our receivers versus the DBs. So let's take a few shots early, then lean on some run game, and then kind of get back to the shots and take advantage of the matchups that we think are favorable. Man, it just I feel for Bobo and the offensive staff. I mean, just when you get put in that situation when you're down that much that early, everything that maybe you wanted to have to do that week, whatever play you put in, your mind, what you're thinking about calling, it just gets scrapped. And you're thinking, hey, what passes do we like? Where can we get completions? And how can we push this ball down the field just to give ourselves a chance?
What do you think of Mike Bobo as an offensive coordinator?
Yeah, I think Bobo's doing a good job of what he's been given. Kind of a little bit of that the Monken stuff from years past, mixing in with his new stuff. I think he's got guys there to do some really, really good stuff with. He's got great playmakers. He's got a great quarterback. To me, this is a tale of two halves of what they did offensively. I think this is more to do with the team than the offense specifically. But man, when it was needed, they scored a lot of points and they pushed the ball down the field. I think Bobo's doing a good job. And I want to see how they respond here this next week versus Auburn. And to me, that's going to tell more of the story than just looking at this one.
How about specifically with Carson Beck on Saturday? That's a guy you and I have talked about obviously plenty, and you know what it feels like to be a quarterback in the spotlight. You know, it certainly seemed like Carson on Saturday was kind of, I would say, once again, sort of not at his best. And this one was maybe a little bit more noticeable because it was such a big stage and the kind of moment you would certainly have assumed that Beck would want to thrive on. You see things with a quarterback that I'm never going to see, Jake. You're just going to notice stuff about that I'm not going to see. And maybe sometimes I'm more critical than I should be because I just don't know the position well enough. Sometimes I may miss some things that Beck needs to be better at because, once again, I just don't know it. But I do know that I didn't love the vibes around Beck there on Saturday. So tell me what you saw from watching Carson in this game.
Yeah. Okay. So the first couple drives, I saw him really just doing his job. First play of the game, we throw a deep over the middle of the field. It gets completed, 20-yard gain. And then we throw a go ball to Arian Smith, an absolute dime. It gets dropped. And then we make a cover zero check on third down. The check, the other 10 guys get the check. Arian doesn't get the check, and we throw an interception. So, the first one or two series of the game, how can I have anything bad to say about how he is playing when he has done exactly what his job is? He took his shot. He made it through a great ball, made a check versus a certain defense and a certain coverage, exactly what we're supposed to do. Now, when you kind of get hit in the mouth a little bit later in the game, how do you respond? A lot of guys try to do more and try to add more to what the play is giving them, trying to do more. Well, sometimes you just got to play the play within the play. And I think, in the middle part of the game here, late in the first quarter, second quarter, I think he was trying to do more than what was being asked. And quite rightfully, I completely understand it because they're down at such a big margin and we got to find our way to get ourselves to get back in this game. And he did later in the game. The turnovers aren't great. And he kind of got comfortable just throwing go balls and fade balls on the sideline and out towards the middle. Now, he did throw the dig and go over the middle of the field. Dylan Bell, great. That was phenomenal. Great ball. But to me, I think he learned a lot in this football game and how to respond and react. And there was a lot of guys who I thought, let's just be honest, I thought Arian Smith was going to go into the tank after the drop and after the missed cover zero check, and then he comes in and has a phenomenal rest of this football game. So there's a lot to say about how these guys continue to fight. This isn't in Atlanta in a mutual stadium. This is in Bryant-Denny in a hostile environment, and these guys, man, just didn't quit.
On the kind of final moment of the game for Georgia offensively, kind of the back shoulder fade, I guess you'd kind of call that, sort of a 50-50 type ball. Once again, as someone who sees this differently than I do, was that a 50-50 ball that the Alabama guy just won on? Was that an underthrow on the back shoulder fade by Carson? Was that a situation in which, your tall receiver right there, Colby Young, has got to go up and just try to high point the football and win the battle? if you tried to, I guess, sort of separate what went wrong on the final pick that ended Georgia's chances of winning the game, how would you diagnose that?
Yeah, really, really glad you brought this up, Brandon. So, kind of mentioned a second ago about just throwing go balls, throwing fade balls. The only thing I didn't like and that I was concerned with was that was the only real answer I felt like the offense had throughout that game was, hey, when stuff is hitting the fan, we're just going to throw go balls and throw fade balls, and hopefully our guy makes the play. I mean, to me, it's just a dangerous spot to be in, because when your guy doesn't make the play, man, it's tough. You just don't have any other answers. And you're living and dying by that sword. And it's just such a low percentage football play. Talking about 50-50 ball, we can't not talk about Jalen Milroe and Ryan Williams on the 75-yard touchdown to respond after Georgia went ahead 34-33. That was a 50-50 ball. That ball was underthrown. Their guy makes a play. Not only does he make a play, he takes it to the house. Ensuing possession, they're moving the ball down the field. Carson's kind of looking at the defense. He has off coverage at 8 yards with Colby Young, 6'3", versus a freshman DB, or he's got kind of press man down here at the bottom to Arian. And in my head, it's hey, it's just matchup. I got to take my guy who's good at it. That's exactly what he did. Was it underthrown? I mean, yeah, probably a little bit, but he's expecting his big body guy to go and basically box this corner out, and just didn't make a play. We kind of got outplayed there in the last seconds of the game, part of it, and I think that's why it's dangerous sometimes to kind of live and die by the go and fade ball sword.
I want to be respectful of your time. Let me squeeze in one more question before we're done. Let me also remind folks, this is our Kroger Fresh Take with Jake Fromm here on DawgNation Daily today. And, of course, getting ready for everything when it comes to the upcoming Saturday fun day when Deep South's oldest rival, one of the best tailgates of the year, especially as the weather maybe takes a little bit of a turn. Afternoon starts, always fun. Many of you also watching these games at home there, too. Well, you get all the game day essentials you need right there at Kroger. And if you want the best that Kroger has to offer in terms of getting the stuff delivered right there to you or earning twice the fuel points on the stuff that you're already buying, become a member today of Kroger Boost. Kroger.com/boost for more on that. It's Kroger.com/boost for more on that. Jake, last thing for you, and as I said before, I'm respectful of your time, hopefully. You know what it feels like to be the quarterback at Georgia. It's the greatest thing in the world when things are going well, and obviously sometimes you probably feel the need to, man, I got to tune this out, this, blowhard, podcast host saying all this kind of stuff. You just got to tune all that kind of stuff out. How does Carson Beck do that right now? Because, obviously, for him, he's, you'd assume, got to sort of have tunnel vision, look towards the next thing. A lot of loud voices out there right now, a lot of stuff being said. Probably not super fun to hear all that stuff about yourself, whether it's fair, accurate, or not. Still not fun to hear it. So as someone who kind of knows what it's like to be the quarterback, and you've been one your whole life and kind of always had the extra spotlight that comes from that, how does Carson Beck right now put some insulation around himself and all the noise that's going to be out there?
Yeah, I mean, let's kind of take a step back and look at where the offense has been over the last 3 weeks. Had a bad showing at Kentucky, had a bye week, and had a rough loss here to Alabama on the road. So, it's been a rough 3 weeks, and I know they're just itching and fighting and just ready to go play someone else, beat up on someone else, and just kind of get just bad taste out of their mouth. I know Carson has it. Put the phone away, go back to work, spend all your time in the building. Just get with your guys. And man, I just kind of would always go to practice and to say, hey, man, this practice, this play, this rep is the most important thing in the world right now. And nothing was better for me and put my mind at more ease than a good week of practice. So I know he's ready and excited to go play somebody else to get this bad taste out of his mouth. And I'm excited, and I can't wait to see how the offense responds.
Jake, I really appreciate you being here today. As I said before, I know it was a late night for you and your Detroit Lions teammates getting a win there over on Monday Night Football. So waking up and being a part of this with us here today, doing it live and getting a chance to hear your thoughts on kind of where things stand with Georgia, incredibly valuable for us. Thank you so much for your time. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll look forward to getting a chance to speak to you very soon here as part of a Kroger Fresh Take again here on DawgNation Daily.
Yes, sir, Brandon. Thank you.
Great stuff.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
I think there's a lot there. I really do. And I love Jake's breakdown of the final interception. I love the honest talk from Jake about, hey, if you really look at what was working, it's a lot of the just sort of heave and hope type stuff of, as he calls them, the go routes, the 50-50 balls, the deep shots, and, obviously the percentage chance of success and something like that, not quite as high as maybe some other passing routes could have been. I think that's a very honest assessment from Jake. That's real talk. I think that's pretty deep analysis. It's better than what I'm capable of providing because Jake plays the quarterback position. That's why we bring on people like that onto our show. Very, very good stuff from Jake Fromm. Now, let me say one more thing, too, before we move on. As we kind of have the theme of sort of turning the page, things like that. Jake Fromm kind of talking about that there of, okay, the only thing to do now is just go beat up on your next opponent, beat up on Auburn, and kind of see if you can kind of change the narrative after all of that. Let me give you a small prediction here for a moment. And this doesn't matter. You probably don't care. I just want you to notice when you see it, okay? And I want you to remember, oh, yeah, BA said this. I want you to watch something. So I told you yesterday that Georgia may still be the best team in college football in a lot of years moving forward. That could certainly happen. But the level of dominance that Georgia showed in 2021 and 2022, that era is now probably over. Georgia may not win a national championship game 65-7 again. Now, I've also told you before that the media, the sort of controllers of the narrative, they hated that version of Georgia. Like, I think a lot of you have suspected that the media was out to get Georgia. I don't believe there was anything all that particularly, like, I don't think there was a particular feud between the media and Georgia, but I don't think the media thought the way in which Georgia played for much of the last, say, 3 seasons was very good for the sport, rendering these games non-competitive, turning National Signing Day into basically a celebration where Georgia was getting all the best players and utilizing them to dominate. I mean, obviously, say for Alabama, and that's a topic we're tired of talking about, say for Alabama, Georgia essentially throttled everybody. And that's not good for business, and so therefore the media in the business, did not like that version of Georgia. Okay, well, now we have a little bit of a suspicion that while Georgia may still be excellent and may actually be the best, the truth is their level of dominance is probably going to subside here a little bit. They may not be quite as week-to-week dominant on both sides of the ball in the full 2 deep as they've been in the past. So watch what's about to happen. And when you see this, I just want you to notice it, and I want you to remember I told you this. The coverage that Georgia gets from the media is about to get a lot more positive. It is. It is. Now that Georgia's less dominant, the media is going to like Georgia more. The media loved what happened on Saturday. All of a sudden, Georgia's playing the same kind of games everybody else plays. Because one of the things that the media likes is the sort of chaotic nature of college football. It makes it different than the NFL. You know that. That you can have a team be up 28-0 and then have the other team that's down 28-0 essentially play as the better team for most of the rest of the game. College football creates those types of situations all the time. And the media that's in the business of selling college football, they love that chaos. The chaos makes the games interesting. Georgia, for the most part, over the course of the last 3 seasons, hasn't really been a participant in that chaos. You get what I'm saying? And so, therefore, that to the media is boring. The media has hated Georgia because they're boring. But now that Georgia's less dominant, to the eyes of the media, they're also going to be less boring. So now you're going to see a lot more favorable coverage for Georgia. It's almost counterintuitive. You would think that Georgia losing, all of a sudden now the media gets to say, we told you this couldn't last for Georgia. But the truth is this version of Georgia, the one that may win but not quite so dominant, and some of this in more thrilling fashion than the sort of death marches of the past, the media is actually going to like this version of Georgia. Watch and see if the coverage of UGA doesn't get a lot more favorable moving forward. Doesn't matter. You don't care. But when you notice it, I want you to remember I'm the one that told you that. All right, let's go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Obviously, hopefully you'll take my advice as well. When it comes to a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, I want to see you in April for our DawgNation cruise because I tell you, some of the great folks that I get a chance to hang out with for our DawgNation invasions, things like that, there are also folks who come on the DawgNation cruise. And what is the DawgNation cruise? It's basically like not quite a full week, but several days worth of what a DawgNation invasion tailgate would be. Just one big long tailgate, except instead of going to a Georgia football game, we're going to Perfect Day Coco Cay or somewhere on the Caribbean or wherever else and just soaking up the sun and having some fun. That's what it's all about. In April of 2025, we want to see you on board Utopia of the Seas. Jessica Slater can tell you all about it. Make sure you give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. All right, let's run through a couple of stories here real quick, and then we're going to talk to Connor Riley after that. First of all, there's this. So Hugh Freeze is doing his weekly press conference, kind of talking about his desire for patience among Auburn fans. I don't think you can talk about Saturday's game for Georgia without talking about kind of where things are for Auburn right now, and where things are probably not very good. Now, Auburn, to me, still is a team that I think under Hugh Freeze can have a pretty bright future. As I've told you before, I almost kind of view this as a little bit of a tank season for Auburn. There's no draft picks in college football, so tanking may not make much sense. But I think that Auburn knows it's got some things in its program that are pretty strong, including freshman wide receivers. After you heard all about the freshman wide receiver for Alabama last week, Auburn's got its own collection of freshman wide receivers. Cam Coleman, the most prominent, but not the only one that matters here. So I think Auburn likely to spend big to keep those guys in the program, and moving forward to the future, spending big to populate the offense with other potential playmakers. But for now, while they're waiting for that to happen, Hugh Freeze is preaching patience. Here's what I believe. I believe that the sort of turmoil of the past, where like the boosters and the administration were fighting over who the football coach was supposed to be, I actually don't think there's much of that going on at Auburn right now. I believe there's probably a little bit more alignment between the money and the decision makers in terms of what the future of the program needs to be. I believe they all sort of believe it's supposed to be Hugh Freeze. But because you're losing games, Hugh Freeze does run the risk of kind of, losing the average fan in all of this. Al from Opelika, if you will, who's, calling into the Feinbaum show or something like that. He probably doesn't like all this losing. And, when Hugh Freeze preaches patience, I think the other thing to sort of keep in mind here is that while I think that Freeze probably privately behind the scenes has a fairly long leash with his employer, all the dumb stuff he keeps saying, and he has said a lot of dumb stuff, to have a lot of experience in the SEC, he's not very media savvy overall. To have all of that continue to happen, I do think that's the one thing that probably harms the patience of his fan base almost more than anything else. So this is a pretty weird Auburn bunch coming into Athens on Saturday. They've been weird for a long time, so perhaps that's not any kind of different type of thing here. But, there's obviously a fully well-established story on the Georgia side, trying to get better after Alabama. But on the Auburn side, this is it's just been a sloppy operation. Not always terrible, though. They have moved the football at times here this year, and they obviously played Georgia close a year ago. So Freeze is asking for patience from the fans. Be interesting to see how much of that they want to give him. Did you watch Texas on Saturday against Mississippi State? They got the win. Not exactly a thing of beauty against a Mississippi State team that's kind of playing at sort of a group of five level. Arch Manning wasn't probably great in the game. It seems like some of the Manning hype has sort of quietly kind of died down a little bit. Steve Sarkisian was seen on the sidelines getting after Manning pretty hard on Saturday a couple of times. I think this is a scenario where Texas probably really benefits from the attention that Alabama is going to get. We said this yesterday. It's really amazing to me how frequently poll voters are changing their mind this year in a way that I don't think we've seen this sort of mass movement for in the past. But I'm sure Texas right now is fairly happy to have a spotlight off of them for a couple of weeks. Now, I told you yesterday, as weird as it may sound, I still think there's a chance that Georgia's favored going to Austin a couple of weeks. They might not be, but I think there's still a decent enough chance that Georgia might be a point favorite, maybe 1.5 possibly. That's at least a possibility, I would say. Texas is not a perfect football team right now. They did not play a perfect game against Mississippi State on Saturday. So as you're thinking about the so-called really high-profile games for Georgia in future weeks, just keep your eye on Texas here right now. A little bit of a different type of team than it was a year ago, and not exactly perfect against Mississippi State this past Saturday. So worth watching as that October date for the Dogs in Austin kind of looms, and, of course, another DawgNation Invasion event for us. And then finally there's this. I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but there's more reporting out there about kind of a clandestine meeting between the SEC and the Big Ten as they once again seem like they want to try to align their desire to get something in the way of like guaranteed playoff bids in the future. I'm talking about, on the other side of the 2026 agreement that's in place right now. And, I guess the chatter is that both the SEC and the Big Ten would seek to get 4 bids for themselves in the future. What's funny is in most years, they may get 3 or 4 bids as it is. It's almost like you don't even necessarily need this in writing. It seems like the competition itself would just sort of take care of that. But it looks like, another issue of Greg Sankey here, certainly on behalf of the SEC, sort of intent to kind of push all of this stuff as far as he can get it to squeeze every single dollar out of this and kind of render the college football playoff into just really sort of a sham of kind of what it's supposed to be, which is a competition to see who the best football team is and not a mechanism for distributing revenue. But it's amazing how universally disliked all this kind of stuff is, and amazing how even in the midst of what I think is a pretty entertaining season, there's a bunch of stuff off the field that keeps trying to kind of push its way into this. But for the most part, we're going to play defense against that and talk about what people want to talk about. But that story is out there. And for now, we'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And here on DawgNation Daily right now, a little later than we normally do on a Tuesday, but happy nonetheless to be welcoming Connor Riley to our program here right now. Connor has written a wonderful story at DawgNation.com, and we'll probably end up spending more time on this one story than we sometimes do when Connor kind of pops on and sort of talks about a bunch of different stuff with us. Some really good stuff with Connor. Is Connor ready to go here? Can we talk to Connor? Okay, we'll play the music.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So as I said before, happy to have Connor as a part of our program here today. Connor, I really thought, because by now, listen, people know the story for Georgia and Alabama. They're kind of ready for the game against Auburn, the chance to turn the page, and how Georgia goes about that's important. And your story looking at how kind of Georgia has used its freshmen, how Alabama has used its freshmen. Stark contrast that I think means more than just maybe what helped decide this game this past Saturday. Thought you did a good job of asking Kirby about that directly yesterday. Seems like it's a topic that Kirby doesn't necessarily want to reveal a lot of details about. But I do think it's important when you see, what Alabama's doing with its secondary. Certainly Ryan Williams. I don't know if you heard this or not. Ryan Williams is only 17 years old. I don't know if you heard that or not. That's shocking news. But, Georgia sometimes seems like, Nate Frazier may be the best example of this, a little more cautious with some of its freshmen. So I want people to read the story, so don't give the whole thing away here. But just give me your premise here of what you've noticed from Georgia and Alabama in terms of how it's used its freshmen and maybe what that means for Georgia against Auburn on Saturday and moving forward for the rest of the season.
Yeah, so I think this starts when I'm looking at the snap counts on Sunday, and KJ Bolden's the only freshman from Georgia that played, and he played 41 snaps. And then you're going back and you're watching that game, and you see 17-year-old Ryan Williams making that play late in that game, finishing with 6 catches and 177 yards. But he wasn't the only freshman to make an impact. In fact, Xavier Brown, a freshman cornerback, had the game-sealing interception in that game. And so you go back, you count up the snap counts for Alabama. KJ Bolden played 41 snaps. He was the only freshman to do so for Georgia on Saturday. Alabama had 176 snaps from 5 freshmen in that game. And so in counting through it and going through it, Georgia had the number 1 recruiting class in the country last year. Alabama had the number 2 recruiting class in the country last year. And when we're in an age now in college football, especially at these programs like Georgia, like Alabama, that want to sign so many players out of high school and not rely on the transfer portal. But yet those schools are still losing a ton to the transfer portal every year. Georgia and Alabama both lost over 20 players. You have to, I think, find a way to get more out of your freshman class early on. And so and again, it's understandable. This is the first time that a lot of these guys are having to play winning football. And I'm not saying that you should play these guys over veterans who are obviously better. But I do think that in this day and age of college football, where rosters skew younger and younger, a team's ability to get meaningful contributions right away out of true freshmen is going to be something that I think is more important going forward. And right now, Georgia is not doing that on the same level as Alabama. And the fact that Alabama, whether because they had to out of need or because they just brought in a better group that is able to contribute immediately, I think the difference in what Alabama got out of its freshmen compared to what Georgia got out of its was something that made a difference on Saturday.
So I think this is such an important topic. I'm really glad you're writing about it. And there are like two thoughts that sort of, I guess, stand out for me about this. The first thing is, I think the notion of who's a 4-star and who's a 5-star, I think that becomes sort of an antiquated way to describe recruits based on what you just said, when the real delineation here is who's capable of playing right away and who isn't. And what makes someone capable of playing right away may be a number of things, the position they play, the talent they have, whatever else. But a sort of high 4-star player who's kind of treated as a developmental project, well, Kirby Smart has acknowledged they only plan on keeping about 30, I should say about, 70% of the players they sign out of high school. They know about, more than a third are going to leave the Georgia program. So therefore, if you bring in a high 4-star player, in some cases even a 5-star player, but he's sort of a developmental guy who's kind of only playing special teams for you and hoping for a chance to play in year 2, who's to say as a fan, I ever get a chance to actually see that guy on the field? He really almost doesn't matter. So this idea of, well, so-and-so the 3-star and so-so is a 4-star and so-so is a 5-star. Ultimately now it's sort of a binary thing of, can you play right away or can you not? And if you can't play right away, then who cares how good you were in high school?
Right. And I'm not saying every player needs to be like Carson Beck and wait their turn to come see the field at Georgia. You still do need guys in your program that are willing to be patient there. But I was struck last week. I was reading a story by John Talty of CBS Sports talking about some of the issues at Auburn. And Auburn signed a 4-star prospect in last year's class, Walker Wright, who finished, I think, as a top 50 overall prospect in the class at quarterback. But Talty, in the same breath, mentions that he's a year or two away from possibly contributing at Auburn. And to your point, that's a problem in how I think recruiting rankings are done nowadays, especially in this day and age in which college football in which we're playing, because so many of these guys are going to abdicate the program before they even get a chance to really be there. You saw, I think, 4 guys from the 2023 freshman class leave after a year. And so I think going forward, if you're Georgia, again, you preach development. And Kirby Smart was right, I think, to bring up guys like Jordan Davis, guys like Quay Walker, Ladd McConkey, who weren't contributors freshman year, who ultimately developed into difference-making players. You need that. But you also need guys that I think are going to come in and play a role for you going forward. And so there are sort of 3 different types of buckets right now, I think, when I look at recruits and how they fit. And the first one is those guys like Quay Walker, Ladd McConkey, Eric Stokes, those guys that redshirt and just need a year to get in there and go play. Then there is the obvious, these guys are able to play from day one. Malachi Starks, Michael Williams, KJ Bolden is this year's avatar for that group. And right now, Georgia is trying to find guys that I think fit into a very important third bucket. These are guys that, maybe not ready to start the season, but over the course of the year, they begin taking more snaps, getting more roles, and playing a bigger part in this team. You think Jordan Davis, you think Trayvon Walker, Jalen Walker in years past as well, Lewis Cine. Those are the types of guys that Georgia is looking for right now. Can Nate Frazier do that? We'll see. Joseph Jonah-Ajonye, a name to mention there. Ellis Robinson, someone I'm very interested in seeing how his development continues this fall. And so those are the types of guys where I think Georgia needs to prioritize, not with this team, but moving forward with recruits. Okay, yes, you need obviously the super mega stars and guys that can play right away. But you're also probably going to need some guys that are at least physically and mentally able of playing and helping for you at some point during the season, because rosters are skewing younger, and with seasons being longer, those guys just take on a naturally more important part in the depth of this team.
Okay, let me say one more thing about this, and I don't think this is going to be very popular, but I don't think we can stop this topic without me saying this. The other thing about all of this is, for Kirby to essentially get up yesterday and say that Nate Frazier didn't play, essentially a DNP CD, did not play coach's decision, I don't know that's enough transparency anymore in the modern age in which we're living. And this is not like Kirby versus the media. Frankly, I've never cared about any of that kind of stuff. To me, this is one of those things where, I was told, I don't know if this is true, but I was told that, like, Nick Saban mentioned Nate Frazier on game day on Saturday. Like, this is a freshman of enough prominence that Saban's talking about him on game day. And, one of the top backs in the country for the most recent class, I'm presuming it took NIL money to get him to Georgia. That's NIL money that came out of the pocket of a Georgia booster somehow, some way. And in the future, with, like, revenue sharing, things like that, ticket prices are going up. The money that Georgia extracts from fans and boosters, they're giving directly to the players. And if you give that money to a freshman to bring him to Georgia, but then essentially decide, well, he's not good enough yet to play in this game, then I think a very fair question to ask in this very contemporary age in which we live is, well, should you be using that money on something else? You can't afford to have dead money in the salary cap in the NFL. And I think there's a version of kind of dead money in college football, that if you're spending a lot of this money on players who you bring in and decide you don't want to play them, that's money that could have been allocated somewhere else. And I know that seems like kind of gross, based on what college football used to be, but it ain't that way anymore. And so if you bring in freshmen, and I presume you have to play the same kind of full combat, sport everybody else does to bring these players in, if you bring them in and then decide, well, they're not quite ready yet, then did you really allocate your resources as best as you possibly could? I know that sounds kind of gross, but it just sort of seems like those are the conversations we ought to be having.
Yeah, it's not like Georgia's playing Scrabble to get these guys. And I'll go one step further. If you're spending resources to bring in a guy like Nate Frazier and he's not playing, well, those resources could have gone elsewhere to help you. And you see with what Auburn does with Cam Coleman this weekend. You saw what Alabama did with the 17-year-old Ryan Williams last weekend. I think when you look at that and you see that, you do open yourself up to some questions when it comes to playing with freshmen and going after those freshman players there. So I think, again, it's all opportunity costs. As you point out, this is modern economics in terms of a salary cap and the management of that, and in terms of transparency. Look, with Nate Frazier in particular, we all saw him play and make a difference in that game against Clemson. But since then, his impact has waned with each week. And part of, Saturday, and while I'm not necessarily so scandalized with this past Saturday, because just Gore was so lopsided right away because it was 28-0, 4 possessions into the game, and naturally that's going to take away from the running back. You also have Trevor Etienne, who I do think has been a good player on this team. But Georgia, I think, moving forward, Nate Frazier represents a guy who I think they do have to find a way to get more out of and find ways to use him as an impactful playmaker. Because Nate Frazier, while again, they didn't have a great receiver in this class, skill player is one area where Alabama has always, I think, consistently had an edge over Georgia. And so you've got to show, I think, when it comes to positions like running back, when it comes to positions like wide receiver, tight end, you can throw in there as well with the history that Georgia has had there, that those have to be places where because we know that those guys are just naturally more expensive coming out of high school, you've got to show that you can win those recruiting battles and then go and play them so that they can make that impact right away. So as gross as this sounds, you're making a return on that investment.
Yeah. Let me finish with this. The last couple of years, we've seen Georgia obviously have its issues against Alabama, but throttle everybody else. I mean, there's clearly some chance the same thing is true now too. Okay, Georgia still has a little bit of an issue with Alabama, but they're going to get back to the business of sort of throttling everybody else here moving forward. Clearly, I think that Georgia's still among the best teams in the country. I don't think you could come back from 28 down against Alabama if you weren't among the best teams in the country. But this idea that Georgia's going to get back to the business of sort of dominating all the other non-Alabama teams, I'm not quite so sure about that. I guess I'm a little skeptical of their ability to kind of get right back to business as usual the way that it's been the last, few years. What do you expect from Georgia going forward?
I'm going to be really interested to see how this team plays against Auburn on Saturday because, and you're naturally, I think, higher on the Auburn program than I am, but this is a game Georgia should win. And I know that, it's a 20-point spread, and usually, the number doesn't mean all that much there, but I think for Georgia, they need to go out and they need to play well early. And they haven't done that. They have one first-half touchdown in 3 games against Power 4 opponents. They have not started fast this year. And while they have the talent to lean on teams and beat teams in the second half, which is where I think over the course of the season you want to be, I think in a game like this where I kind of think Auburn is maybe looking for reasons to lay down with how they've lost games this season, if Georgia gets out to a big lead early and is able to make this an easier game, I think that could be very well welcome because you don't want to find yourself in back-to-back wars against Alabama and Auburn. And I do think that this Auburn team is capable of making this a more difficult game. They are capable of doing some things there. And so this is a Georgia team where I think that this is a culture game because I don't think Auburn has a very good winning culture right now. And I still believe that Georgia does. And I think that that culture needs to show up from the first snap this week and throughout the first half. And if they're able to get up big on Auburn, I think that's going to answer a lot of the questions that we have. But the last two times that we've seen Georgia against Kentucky and against Alabama, and yes, both those games were on the road, Georgia just did not play well in the first half. They played down and worse than the level of competition they were going against. And so I think this team needs a fast start, and I do wonder if the first quarter doesn't necessarily go well, as it has not the last two times that Georgia has played. Do they start pressing a little bit and making this more difficult than it needs to be? So I'm really fascinated by what we see on Saturday. This is a team they should beat. This is a team they are better than. But Georgia was a lot better than Kentucky, and they found a way to make that a four-quarter game. Georgia and Alabama were comparable, but after 4 possessions, Alabama was up 28-0, and Georgia had not crossed midfield. So I think that this is a game where we're going to find out how strong that Georgia culture really is.
Connor, well said, and a lot of great coverage coming out of Athens. Obviously, more of that continues throughout the rest of the week. Deep South's oldest rivalry on Saturday. I look forward to seeing you in Athens, and of course, I appreciate your time here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro.
As always, it was a pleasure.
Great stuff. Connor Riley Strong there. Oh, by the way, today, as soon as we're done here, you can't see this under the desk, but I've got shorts on because we have a wonderful golf outing taking place today with our friends from the Finnish Long Drink. We talked about this in the show going back a few weeks ago, and I love the pairing that the Finnish Long Drink provides for golf. I wish all of you could be with us here today. Maybe one of these days we'll do a big golf outing that everybody can be a part of, but I do know this. When I'm playing golf, which is usually not very well, but I'm always drinking well, which means I've got the delicious Finnish Long Drink, one of the varieties there. We actually talked about this at our DawgNation Invasion event on Friday night. For me, the grapefruit's still my favorite. The gin kick, the grapefruit flavor. I just like the blue can. I think the way in which the condensation sort of drips down the side of the can looks good, especially in the drink holder of a cup holder of the golf cart. Always great when you're playing golf. Plenty of that for us here today with the folks in the Finnish Long Drink. Make sure you stay tuned to the DawgNation video channels. We'll try to show you some of that. You guys can, what's it that Max Homa likes to do, kind of roast swing? Some of y'all, I'll give y'all a chance to roast my swing. I don't actually have enough self-esteem to do that because I'm not very good. But at least in theory, we'll do some of that. But I do want you to do this. Check out thelongdrink.com. And you can find out where you can pick up some Finnish Long Drink, and you can make it a big part of what you're doing, as so many of the folks in our audience have. You always love to see all of that. All right, Golden Shoe today is a blast from the past. I don't know why I was thinking about this. Going back, we can bring that music down. There we go. Going back to 2017, to give you a reminder of what Saturday can mean. And in the world we live in now, Georgia's accomplished so much. The playoff is the race for that so intense. The teams that are just not very competitive in that race sort of get left by the wayside, Auburn being one of those. But y'all, as I just said to Connor, this is still the Deep South's oldest rivalry. And even in the Kirby Smart era, do you remember the SEC Championship of 2017 after what had been a blowout loss to Auburn there at Jordan-Hare Stadium in November? Gus Malzahn on the field after the game saying we beat the dog crap out of Georgia, such a juvenile thing for anyone to say. Well, clearly that was a source of motivation for Georgia after that game. Isaac Nada told our friends from Channel 11 that he certainly remembered that. And I don't know why I thought about that today. I just wanted to kind of put this on the screen here to remind you. Hey, there are some rivalry stakes in place for Saturday, and so we'll certainly look forward to being between the hedges for that and a chance to see the Dawgs get themselves another win. So Golden Shoe going to Isaac Nada for a fun moment in the past. And speaking of hated rivals, the lousy, stinking Gator is certainly one of those. How about 1,424 days? That's how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. That's our Gator hater updater. Y'all have a great day. We will see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily presented by ServPro. We'll look forward to talking to you then. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. That is what our friends at R.S. Andrews are all about. So, as I told you, we have our golf outing here today, which means I got to be short with comments. We also went like 15 till yesterday. That was like one of those old school comment sections where we just really went a real long time. Today is not going to be that. But we will take your comments nonetheless. Let me go to YouTube to start things here today. We'll see how folks are doing over there. Scott Pete says, I hate Auburn. I was at the game. They hosed us. And when he says they hosed us, he doesn't mean euphemistically. We've talked about this before. Cody Chaffetz back in the summer, we played some of this. The 1986 Georgia-Auburn game, one of the craziest things you will ever see. And if you haven't seen that, you should. Long history between these two rivals. And the fact that that you were there is actually pretty amazing. Spencer Clark says the psychological part is the battle you have to feel dominant at all times. I think so. I don't know that I completely agree with that. I don't know. Like, this is dorky. You ever read the C.S. Lewis line, The Witch in the Wardrobe, I think it was, where, like, he says, you know, is he safe? No, but he's good. Like, you know, if you're dominant, you sort of feel like you're always safe. But oftentimes you find out that was false confidence. But when you're content with not being safe, when you're content with going out there and having a battle against someone who may be better than you, but you still feel like you're good, even in these very risky circumstances. You know, you go play a game at Alabama with a gazillion people watching on TV. You play poorly in that game, and people are going to say all kinds of stuff about you. And, you know, you're like, there's just a lot at risk when you put yourself in that situation. A lot of people, even if they could have the potential glory, would not want to go through the challenge of those feelings. They just wouldn't, because it's not safe, but you can still be good. And so I think the idea of, oh man, we're going to dominate, and I get the point that you're making. I guess I just sort of see it a little bit differently. That to me sometimes comes across as sort of a false level of confidence. Man, I'm about to dominate, but what if you don't? What do you do then? Because that's one of the things you do see in life, is that people who think they're smart get very careful not to do something that might risk that belief in their intelligence. Or people who think they're strong don't exactly put that strength to the test, because what if they're not? So that's just one of the first things that comes to my mind. But as I said before, that may be a little out there. Spencer Clark, thank you for the kind words. I appreciate that. Let's see what else. Jimbo Sliced Bread says, I know it was an all-hands-on-deck type of situation, but it was obvious that Mikael Williams was not ready, and we should not have played him. His recovery for the remainder of the season is in regress now. Well, I don't know if that part is true or not. I don't know if that part, like, I don't have any reason to think that he necessarily regressed, but I told you all week long that if Mikael Williams was in the game, it was going to be window dressing at best. Now, he actually ended up playing by 25 snaps, which is more than I thought he would play. And he certainly gave Georgia courageous effort. He deserves to be commended for that. But I've said this a million times. If you think someone is hurt, they probably are. I mean, there are very few examples in football of someone who was pretending to be injured, sandbagging, and goes out there and plays amazing. Like, even like, to take it back to before I was born, y'all know the famous like Willis Reed game where like Willis Reed for the New York Knicks. Like, I grew up seeing this highlight all the time. It happened several years before I was born, but I grew up seeing this highlight all the time of Willis Reed kind of jogging out of the tunnel at Madison Square Garden to come, you know, courageously give the Knicks a big boost in what was the NBA Finals, right? Well, there's Mikael Williams right there. Willis Reed scored like 2 points in that game. It's like the most famous return from injury of all time, and he scored like 2 points. That it was totally a symbolic gesture, because if you think someone's hurt, even if they try to gut it out, they're still gutting it out. And, you know, I find myself being excessively candid this week. If you want to know what this was, I sort of think, and I hate to be this way because it kind of takes some of the romanticism out of it, I sort of think that Mikael Williams wanted to show NFL scouts he was willing to play hurt. I honestly think that's what this was. I think he wanted to demonstrate to NFL scouts that he's willing to play hurt. And you know what? That's his prerogative, because he didn't hurt Georgia for being out there, but it was a symbolic gesture at best. Mikael Williams was not going to change this game on Saturday. He's not healthy enough to do that. Now, the commenter said that he thinks that he now regressed because of the injury. I'm not a medical expert. I couldn't tell you that one way or another. It would not surprise me if he doesn't play on Saturday, but that's not necessarily because he got further hurt, as I said before. I mean, some of this stuff is sometimes kind of for show, and I just sort of think Mikael Williams wanted to demonstrate his willingness to give his team an effort, despite the fact that he was hurt, because, you know, it would look good on his NFL resume. And if I'm being completely honest, that's sort of what I thought this was. And I thought it might be like 10 or 11 snaps, turned out to be 25, but it's the same basic thing, I believe. John Paul Williams says, "We're not descended from fearful men. Bring on the competition." That's good, John. I like that. Al Chandler says we need to put them in a 3 and out. We need to score first on Saturday to set the mood. Well, the good thing is if Georgia does come out and give it the dominant effort, you know, like you said, full, you know, big start defensively, scoring points offensively. I mean, it's still Auburn. Georgia fans will enjoy that. Kevin Krink says that's saying that a 70% Mikael is better than 100% backup. I typically don't believe that, even for a player who, I mean, listen, I think Mikael Williams is an outstanding player. I would probably still rather have 100% worth of, you know, a backup compared to, if you say 70% of Mikael Williams. I typically like the 100, especially at a place like Georgia. I like the fully healthy backup. But I don't have any reason to believe that Mikael being out there cost Georgia anything. I just don't think that. It's one of those deals where some people fixate on that as a huge talking point, but ultimately I just didn't think that was ever destined to be that big of a factor in the game. It's just, like, it's kind of a, to me, it's more of a, like, I don't use the phrase nothing burger. For some reason, I don't like that phrase. But to me, it's just sort of a nothing. It's sort of a non-entity. Like, it wasn't bad. It wasn't good. It was just a thing that was done so he could say that he did it. And I think that Georgia was fine with him. They probably would have been similar without him. It's just sort of a thing that happened. But there was just not going to be this Superman cape from Mikael where, you know, he comes back on and whatever. Now, let me not say that. You know, was there a recent instance of a Georgia player who maybe did come back sooner than he should have? I don't know. That's not for me to say because I just don't know. But so I can't say that there hasn't been a moment in the recent past when I did think a Georgia player perhaps came back sooner than he should. But who's to say that I'm even right about that? Because of all the things I don't know, someone's medical health is very high on that list. Susan Levy says, at this point, I'm okay if we don't blow people out, but we keep winning. As long as we make it to the playoffs, that's the ultimate goal. That's when I want us to blow people out. Yeah, Susan, you may be right about that. And I was actually kind of thinking about this a little bit too, that most college football fans show up at a game or tune in to watch a game just simply hoping their team will win. You know, like that's what most fans wake up in the morning thinking, boy, it'd be great if my team won. Like Georgia has made winning such an afterthought that pretty much all we ever talk about is how Georgia wins. Was it by enough margin? Was it sexy enough? Was it whatever? Like that's pretty much all we ever discuss is the manner in which Georgia won. But most college, like let's say that we were all Mississippi State fans, and I'm doing like, you know, Bully Nation Daily or whatever they call themselves, Klanga, you know, Nation Daily, you know, whatever their thing is. If we're all Mississippi State, I'm not picking on Mississippi State, I'm just giving you an example, and not just this year, but any year. If we're all Mississippi State fans and we're doing a Mississippi State show, man, we're just hoping for some wins. Boy, wouldn't it be great if we won on Saturday? That's what the fan would be saying. Whereas at Georgia, we're so beyond all of that. Well, now maybe this is a moment in which, okay, Georgia's not number one anymore. They're not undefeated. They're not long winning streak. Like it's all just sort of gone for now. And I don't mean this in like a negative way. I'm just mean all the stuff that Georgia's been carrying with it to every single game. Now that's just sort of over. So now maybe as fans, we can all go back to just being happy when Georgia wins. And hopefully they'll collect a bunch of these wins. And as Susan says, maybe that adds up to being ready for the games that matter most later in the season. But maybe now you get a chance to sort of do that. JP says on DawgNation.com, this Georgia team's still growing and hasn't hit its ceiling, especially on offense and in the secondary. Yeah, I would say that's true. I'd also say that growth and development isn't a guarantee. You know, that's not a natural progression necessarily. You still got to make the right decisions, got to push the right buttons in order to get there. Morris Rich says, if Bama played that many freshmen and beat us like that, that's really not good for us. Yeah, Morris, I mean, I think it's a fair point in that I think that one of the things that Alabama has somehow been good at, either because of great scout, and look, there's a lot of evidence that Georgia is really good at scouting a lot of things. I'm not saying that Georgia's deficient in scouting, but one of the things that Alabama just seems to be really good at is they seem to identify recruits that can be impact freshmen, and they can immediately add to the list of capable contributors you have. Like, Ryan Williams just isn't just good for a freshman. He's the sort of player that all of a sudden makes Alabama more of a national championship contender because of his presence. That, who cares if he's a 4-star, a 5-star, whatever else. He is a ready-to-play now, immediate contributor freshman. And that's the category that currently matters more than anything else. Like, it's almost like, and I hate all this, but it's just sort of the way you got to talk. Like, you may have sort of a 6-figure type player, or you may have like $1 million baller, and the $1 million baller is the guy that generates the extra NIL, but he does so for a reason because he plays right away. Really kind of demonstrating and identifying who those like $1 million baller type guys are. That's the thing that probably matters. Yard Dog on what Jake Fromm said about Carson Beck. Yeah, I thought that was interesting too, Yard, that as a quarterback, when you feel like you got a couple of big plays, it's sort of like, this is one of those deals where obviously I have no idea what it feels like to be Carson Beck, but we've all played some kind of sports before, and when something that you think is there for you doesn't go your way, like let's say you're pitching and you get a bad call, it's sort of hard to kind of get, just to be honest with you, for the average athlete, it's sort of hard to kind of go back and do it again because let's say you're pitching. Throwing strikes is hard. If you feel like you throw one and didn't get credit for it, then throwing another strike is mentally just a little bit more difficult. I'm going to play golf later on today. Golf is a hugely mental game for me because my ability is so limited that I just get in my head so much because of how hard I have to try just to do anything successfully. And, Beck's obviously an elite athlete, so I can't put myself into his headspace. But my guess is if you feel like you threw a dime deep down the sideline and it got dropped, I'm guessing that probably does play with you a little bit. I'm guessing that's the case. All right, a couple of final comments, then we got to go for today, y'all, and I'm sorry. Greg Rosenberg says the 2024 year had 3 or 4 the 2024 class had 3 or 4 generation wide receivers. Smith, Williams, Coleman. Yeah, Jeremiah Smith at Ohio State. Ryan Williams at Alabama. Coleman, who Georgia will see against Auburn on Saturday. Greg says that there's also one generational cornerback who could potentially shut them down, but we're not playing that guy. It is interesting. Now, I also would have told you I thought that Georgia would be really good at cornerback, and so therefore a little harder for Ellis Robinson to kind of emerge there. But the truth is, on Saturday, it didn't appear they were great there. So perhaps fair. Jonathan Aaron says if we went out and Beck has the same numbers he had against Bama without turnovers, do you think that it'll get him back into the race for New York? I certainly think it could. I think it's a possibility. He's going to be on TV enough in high-profile games. That does give him a leg up over his competition. Jimbo Sliced Bread says that Ryan Williams is going to be a multi-millionaire NFL player before he can legally purchase alcohol. It's strange, right? It's crazy. Crazy. Let me go back to Facebook for a second. Kent Holcomb says, we don't want our fan base to start sounding like Alabama's or Florida and Tennessee's. The last 2 days have been akin to them. He says, we seldom sound that way, even felt that somewhat a couple of times. Yeah, I mean, look, I'm gonna defend fans a lot. Fans have a right to be disappointed because, this is the agreement we've all made. We have a deep emotional connection to our favorite college football team. It doesn't really always make logical sense, but the reason why we do that is because it makes the really good moments really fun. And I mean, think about how boring the week would be if we didn't have college football to kind of help us pass the time. A lot of this stuff doesn't work when you deconstruct it, but that's ultimately what this is. It's about creating this sort of pastime that makes the days more enjoyable. And so in order to kind of establish the sort of emotional connection that makes that possible, well, you're going to have the heavy disappointment after a loss. So fans being disappointed, I have a very high tolerance for that. Even if the emotion of the moment causes them to say something they might later on want to take back, as long as it's not, too out of bounds, I'm sort of okay with that too. It's just kind of the nature of it all. It's just kind of the nature of it. And so, you have a couple of days worth of heavy emotion, a lot of anger, a lot of disappointment, and folks just kind of return back to a normal state of being. But the one thing I am proud of when it comes to Georgia fans, especially when you compare to, you'll see the sign on game day, and I don't pick on if I don't pick on players, I definitely don't pick on fans. We're not going to punch down in that regard. But like the sign on game day on Saturday of like the Alabama fan who supposedly missed his wife's child's birth to be at game day. There's a lot I could say about that, but I'm not going to say it. But the point is, like, that's not what Georgia fans do. Georgia, like I'm not only proud of what Georgia is as a team, I'm proud of what Georgia fans are on a daily basis, 12 months a year. So, yeah, that is the case. Good to see Ryan Walker in the comment section. He says, we need to see more of Nate Frazier. He definitely would have been a total difference maker, period. Slow starts aren't going to cut it offensively, and the defense has to be better and not give up big plays early. He says, can't forget DeBoer played Lanning a couple of times, so he knew how to attack our defense. Perhaps that's the case, and I agree with some of the stuff on Nate Frazier. Now, it's also true that, this game on Saturday probably took running back out of it a bit, but I think the topic still stands of, at some point in time, somebody gave money to Georgia to sign Nate Frazier on an NIL deal out of high school. You would just presume that to be true because if it wasn't the case, that's one of the rare instances when an elite player chose a school without NIL money. So the NIL money had to come from somewhere. So if Georgia boosters or very soon season ticket holders, just even random rank and file fans, are being asked to fund this, then I do think it's a fair question to ask, okay, what's being done with this money? In other words, money and secrecy don't pair well together. There's always going to be a requirement for accountability when money is involved. And I don't know if y'all have noticed this or not, but college football has become about the money in every way, in every moment, in every instance. It is about the money. So when you've been given money, how you choose to use that accountability is going to be required. And this stuff does not exist in the NFL. In the NFL, if so-and-so doesn't play, the coach is going to give his reason why. But at certain moments throughout the week, it's an open locker room. A media member can walk in and ask any player on the team any question about any topic. They may choose to dodge it. They may do whatever else. But this idea of, so-and-so didn't play, just was coach's decision. Like, that doesn't really exist in the NFL. And I don't mean, I'm not trying to, stir it up as it relates to Georgia, but, if you've got guys who are here on financial deals, on NIL-type deals, and that money came from boosters and fans, when those guys don't play, just the old company line of, he's still working and getting better and, taking a lot of pride in his effort. If that was my money that was going to that player, I don't know if I would feel like that was enough for me. And we'll see how long that's enough down here in college football. Let's do one or two more. Greg Childers on the subject of Cash Jones. Yeah, so it was interesting to see, in a couple of those key moments late in that game, it was Cash Jones who was in the game. Oh, that was interesting. Let's see what else. Crow King 123 says after getting bashed after the Kentucky game that Georgia should have been ravenous demons. Here's the thing, though, and I've said this before. It's like, okay, so a little bit of a motivation can kind of come from, some of that kind of stuff. But ultimately, the game is not really a motivation game. That's like a 1% edge, maybe. The game is determined by the talent that you acquire, the talent that you develop, and the talent that you deploy. And the so-called, coaches like to pretend like the only thing they do is motivate their players and block out distractions. Like if you listen to, this is any coach, their press conferences, they like to make the conversation be about establishing the right mindset, because that's a very inexact thing. There is no way to measure that you have the right mindset or not. So that's what coaches like to talk about. The sort of intangible, immeasurable, non-quantifiable things like, were we focused? Were we, did we not realize that humility was a week away? Were we blah, blah, blah? They like to sort of live in that world. But the actual world of football is, who did you bring in? How well did you develop them? And how did you choose to use them on game day? Accountability for choices. Now, listen, Georgia's got great coaches, and they've done a great job coaching this team to a lot of success. This is sort of not just about Georgia. It's about just coaching in general, that this idea of, man, Georgia's got the right motivational edge. And I love playing that game. Obviously, during the week, it's fun to do. It's kind of, we sort of feel like it's our way of kind of impacting this from time to time. But the actual story of a football game is, what kind of talent did you bring in? How well have you gotten that talent to get ready to play? And what strategically do you choose to use that talent for on game day? And emotions 1% of that pie, 99% are actual decisions that coaches make that make winning or losing more likely or not. But that's never going to be what any coach wants the pregame or the postgame press conference to be about. They don't want to be judged in that way. But I'm going to tell you this. To make this about something more serious, think about the military for a moment. I have no idea how to win a war or win a battle strategically. I wouldn't know how to do that. Don't know a flanking maneuver, things like that. And the average citizen doesn't really. But the military, the armed forces, they still answer to a civilian who has to answer, at least theoretically, it used to be, theoretically has to answer to the public. In other words, the public chooses the civilian that leads the armed services, despite the fact that the average civilian doesn't have any idea about how to execute military strategy or, battle strategy, that there is still going to be an element of accountability for results, even from kind of non-experts. That's just how that goes. Let us do, I got to go, y'all. Anything else? Pac Jam says that he thinks the offense is too basic. I really don't think that. Now, look, I've told you a million times, I also don't know. But to my eyes, and certainly having talked to people and known people who've, been around Coach Bobo, I don't think anyone's thinking it's too basic. I mean, Mike Bobo asks a lot from these guys. At least I've been told. Ulysses Dunning says that Cash Jones is better at catching the ball out of the backfield than the other guy. That's why he's playing more. Could very well be the case that this is not something negative about the other backs as much as it is. Maybe it's a positive thing about Cash Jones. You have to at least consider that as a possibility. DT says he doesn't think the NIL contribution, is it connotes? How you say that? Connotes? Express requirement to play the kid. Not an express requirement to, but money and transparency always have to go hand in hand. Money and secrecy don't ever pair very well together. Morris Rich says, have fun on the links. Well, I am looking forward to it, as I have not played golf in forever, but I am looking forward to it. Savannah Bryan says, is Texas a must-win game now? I don't think it's must-win from the standpoint of a 10-2 Georgia still making the playoff. But if you don't beat Texas, I sort of feel like every game for the rest of the season is probably a must-win. And so you're sort of back to the old world of college football where you get it's like people say the regular season matters less, but lose yourself a couple and all of a sudden all those games start mattering more. Randy Hall says, what score would I be happy with on Saturday? I'll say the same thing I said this past week. Obviously a very different level of opponent. If Georgia could score a touchdown in all 4 quarters, I think I'd probably just be happy with that. I'd love to see a touchdown in each quarter. I really would. A touchdown in the first, a touchdown in the second, one in the third, one in the fourth. And if you score more than that, that's great. I just like to see Georgia score in all 4 quarters. I think that's the case. All right, we got to go for now. I said we're going to be early, and it's 11:30. I have got to go, y'all. Have a good day. Thanks for being here. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric. Speaking of golf, I know Dari loves to play golf. Always out there enjoying that. In fact, he sent me some cool pictures the other day. I'll try to show y'all some of that from him the other day. But if your water heater goes out, in many cases, RS Andrews can replace it for you the same day. So find them online, rsandrews.com. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. We'll look forward to talking to you then.